Question 1. An internal audit of a financial services firm, Quantum Capital, reveals that while the board has clearly articulated a risk appetite statement indicating a willingness to embrace calculated technological innovation for competitive advantage, there are no defined quantitative or qualitative thresholds for acceptable deviations from this appetite. During a review of a new cybersecurity investment project, the audit team notes that the project's potential financial impact, if a major breach occurs, exceeds the initial budgetary allocation for risk mitigation by a significant margin, yet the project continues without formal escalation or reevaluation based on predefined limits. According to ISO 31000, 2018 Principles for Effective Risk Management, what critical element is demonstrably absent in Quantum Capital's framework that would allow for the practical application and monitoring of its stated risk appetite? Option A, a formalized risk acceptance process for all new initiatives. Option B, a comprehensive risk register detailing all identified threats. Option C, independent assurance on the effectiveness of risk controls. Option D, clearly defined risk tolerance levels linked to the risk appetite statement. The correct answer is D, clearly defined risk tolerance levels linked to the risk appetite statement. Explanation. The scenario describes an organization that has defined its risk appetite as the amount and type of risk it is willing to pursue or retain to achieve its objectives. However, it has not established specific risk tolerance levels. Risk tolerance, as defined by ISO 31000, 2018, is the extent to which an organization is prepared to go in pursuit of its objectives before it starts to deviate from its risk appetite. Without defined tolerance levels, the organization lacks a clear operational boundary for managing risks. For instance, if the risk appetite is to accept a moderate level of financial risk in new ventures, a tolerance level might be that no single new venture can result in a loss exceeding 5% of the organization's annual revenue. If a risk event occurs that pushes the actual risk exposure towards or beyond this tolerance level, it signals a need for immediate intervention or a review of the risk response strategy. This distinction is crucial for internal auditors to assess the effectiveness of risk management frameworks. Tolerance levels translate the broader appetite into actionable metrics, enabling the organization to monitor its risk-taking activities and ensure they remain within acceptable boundaries. The absence of these specific metrics means that, while the organization knows its general stance on risk, it cannot effectively measure or control its day-to-day risk exposures against that stance, potentially leading to unintended deviations from its strategic goals. Question 2. Assessment of the integration of a risk management framework into an organization's strategic planning process reveals that while risk identification workshops are conducted quarterly, the outcomes are seldom formally linked to the annual strategic review. Furthermore, risk treatment plans are developed by individual department heads, but lack a centralized tracking mechanism for their implementation status or effectiveness. Based on the principles of ISO 31000, 2018, which of the following would be the most significant indicator of a poorly implemented risk management framework in this context? Option A, the reliance on external consultants for the initial design of the risk management framework. Option B, the use of qualitative risk assessment techniques rather than quantitative methods. Option C, the infrequent frequency of risk management committee meetings. Option D, the absence of a formally documented risk appetite statement that guides strategic decision-making. Correct answer is D, the absence of a formally documented risk appetite statement that guides strategic decision-making. Explanation. The effectiveness of a risk management framework's implementation is assessed by examining how well its components are integrated and operationalized within the organization's processes and culture. This involves evaluating the degree to which risk management principles and practices are embedded in decision-making, strategic planning, and day-to-day operations. An internal auditor would look for evidence of a structured approach to risk identification, analysis, evaluation, treatment, and monitoring, as well as the establishment of clear roles and responsibilities for risk management. Furthermore, the auditor would assess the communication and consultation processes related to risk, ensuring that relevant stakeholders are engaged and informed. The quality and comprehensiveness of risk management policies and procedures, the availability of resources, and the competency of personnel involved in risk management activities are also critical indicators. Ultimately, The evaluation seeks to determine if the framework is contributing to the achievement of organizational objectives by proactively managing potential threats and opportunities. The absence of documented risk appetite statements, the reliance on ad hoc risk assessments without a systematic process, and a lack of clear accountability for risk treatment actions would indicate a less effective implementation. Question 3. An internal audit engagement is reviewing the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework, specifically focusing on the role of leadership and commitment as outlined in ISO 31000-2018. The audit team observes that while a formal risk management policy exists and is documented, senior management's involvement in ongoing risk discussions appears minimal, and risk management initiatives are primarily driven by the compliance department without clear strategic integration. What is the most significant indicator of a potential deficiency in leadership's commitment to establishing and maintaining the risk management framework in this scenario? Option A. The risk management policy is documented but lacks widespread communication and integration into daily operations. Option B. Senior management's participation in ongoing risk discussions is limited, suggesting a lack of active oversight and strategic alignment. Option C. The compliance department is primarily responsible for risk management activities, indicating a siloed approach. Option D. Risk management initiatives are driven by the compliance department rather than being integrated into strategic decision-making processes. The correct answer is A. The risk management policy is documented but lacks widespread communication and integration into daily operations. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that leadership and commitment are foundational for effective risk management. This means that senior management must actively champion risk management, integrate it into the organization's culture and decision-making processes, and provide the necessary resources and oversight. An internal auditor assessing leadership's commitment would look for evidence of this active involvement. This includes reviewing whether the risk management policy is clearly communicated and understood throughout the organization, if risk appetite is defined and communicated by leadership, and if risk management objectives are aligned with the organization's overall strategic goals. Furthermore, the auditor would examine whether leadership actively participates in risk reviews, allocates adequate resources for risk management activities, and holds individuals accountable for managing risks within their areas of responsibility. The absence of these tangible demonstrations of leadership engagement, such as risk management being treated as a mere compliance exercise or lacking visible support from the top, indicates a deficiency in leadership commitment, which is crucial for establishing and maintaining a robust risk management framework, as per the standards principles. Question 4. An internal audit of a multinational logistics firm, operating under stringent international trade regulations, reveals that the process for identifying and assessing emerging geopolitical risks affecting supply chain stability is documented but inconsistently applied across different regional hubs. Specifically, the audit team found that while the risk assessment methodology is defined, the frequency of review and the depth of analysis for certain high-impact geopolitical events vary significantly, leading to potential gaps in preparedness. Considering the principles of ISO 31000-2018 and the auditor's responsibility to evaluate the effectiveness of risk management processes, what is the most appropriate approach for the auditor to conclude and report on this finding? Option A. Report the finding as a significant deficiency, emphasizing the potential for unmitigated risks to disrupt critical supply chains and impact the firm's ability to meet contractual obligations, recommending immediate standardization and enhanced oversight of the risk assessment process across all hubs. Option B. Focus solely on the documentation aspect, reporting that the process is documented but its application is not uniform, without assessing the potential impact on the firm's risk profile or suggesting corrective actions beyond procedural adherence. Option C. Classify the finding as a minor procedural deviation, noting that the core risk assessment methodology is in place, and suggest that regional managers be reminded of the documented procedures during their next team meetings. Option D. Recommend a complete overhaul of the risk identification and assessment framework, citing the inconsistency as evidence that the entire system is fundamentally flawed and requires a complete redesign to align with best practices. The correct answer is A. Report the finding as a significant deficiency, emphasizing the potential for unmitigated risks to disrupt critical supply chains and impact the firm's ability to meet contractual obligations, recommending immediate standardization and enhanced oversight of the risk assessment process across all hubs. Explanation: the core of evaluating audit findings in risk management, particularly within the framework of ISO 31000-2018, involves assessing the effectiveness of the organization's risk management processes against established criteria. When an internal auditor identifies a deviation from these criteria, such as a control weakness or a process inefficiency related to risk treatment, the auditor must consider the implications for the organization's overall risk profile and its ability to achieve its objectives. The auditor's report should not merely state the finding, but also provide context and an assessment of the impact. This assessment involves considering the likelihood and consequence of the identified risk event occurring due to the finding, and how this impacts the achievement of specific organizational objectives. Furthermore, the auditor must evaluate the adequacy of existing controls and the potential for improvement. The process of formulating an audit finding requires a thorough understanding of the audit scope, the relevant risk management processes, and the organization's risk appetite. The auditor's role is to provide assurance that the risk management framework is functioning as intended and to identify areas where it can be strengthened. This requires a deep understanding of the interrelationship between identified risks, implemented controls, and the potential for residual risk to exceed acceptable levels, thereby jeopardizing strategic goals or operational continuity. The auditor's evaluation must be objective, evidence-based, and focused on the potential impact on the organization's ability to manage its risks effectively and achieve its intended outcomes. Question 5. During an internal audit of an organization's risk management process, an auditor is examining the qualitative risk assessment methodology. The organization has developed descriptive scales for likelihood and consequence to populate a risk matrix. What is the primary focus of the auditor's review concerning these qualitative scales according to ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. Ensuring the scales are clearly defined, appropriate for the organization's context, and consistently applied to facilitate meaningful risk prioritization. Option B. Verifying that the scales are numerically quantifiable to allow for precise statistical modeling of risk exposure. Option C. Assessing whether the scales are sufficiently complex to challenge experienced risk managers and identify subtle risk nuances. Option D. Confirming that the scales are aligned with industry best practices from completely unrelated sectors to ensure maximum innovation. Correct answer is A. Ensuring the scales are clearly defined, appropriate for the organization's context, and consistently applied to facilitate meaningful risk prioritization. Explanation: the core of qualitative risk analysis, as guided by ISO 31000-2018, involves assessing the likelihood and consequence of identified risks. A risk matrix is a common tool for this, visually representing risks based on these two dimensions. When an internal auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework, they must evaluate how the organization has defined its qualitative scales for likelihood and consequence. These scales should be clearly articulated and consistently applied across the organization to ensure comparability and meaningful prioritization of risks. For instance, a qualitative scale for likelihood might range from rare to almost certain, with defined, descriptive criteria for each level. Similarly, consequence scales would span from insignificant to catastrophic, again with clear descriptions of impact across various organizational objectives, e.g., financial, reputational, operational safety. The auditor's role is to verify that these scales are appropriate for the context of the organization, that they are understood by those performing the risk assessment, and that the resulting risk ratings e.g., low, medium, high, are used effectively to inform risk treatment decisions and the overall risk appetite. The auditor would not be performing the risk assessment itself, but rather auditing the process and its inputs, ensuring the qualitative analysis is robust and aligned with the organization's risk management policy and objectives. The effectiveness of the qualitative analysis is directly tied to the clarity and appropriateness of these defined scales. Question 6. An internal audit team is evaluating the risk management framework of a multinational logistics company, Global Freight Solutions. The audit objective is to assess the degree to which risk management is embedded across the organization's operations and strategic decision-making processes, aligning with the principles outlined in ISO 31000-2018. The auditors have observed that while the company has a dedicated risk management department that produces comprehensive risk registers, these registers are often reviewed and updated retrospectively after significant operational incidents have occurred. Furthermore, strategic decisions regarding market expansion into new territories appear to be driven primarily by market opportunity analysis, with limited formal integration of potential geopolitical or supply chain disruption risks into the initial decision-making framework. Which of the following audit findings would most strongly indicate a deficiency in the integration principle of risk management as per ISO 31000-2018? Option A. The internal audit function itself has not undergone specific training on the application of ISO 31000-2018 principles in its audit methodologies. Option B. The risk management department's documentation of identified risks lacks sufficient detail regarding the root causes and potential impact of each identified risk. Option C. The organization has not established a formal risk appetite statement that is clearly communicated to all levels of management and staff. Option D. Audit evidence indicates that risk management considerations are not consistently or proactively incorporated into strategic planning and major operational decision-making processes, leading to reactive rather than proactive risk mitigation. The correct answer is D. Audit evidence indicates that risk management considerations are not consistently or proactively incorporated into strategic planning and major operational decision-making processes, leading to reactive rather than proactive risk mitigation. Explanation. The question probes the understanding of how the principles of ISO 31000-2018, specifically integration, are manifested in a robust risk management framework. Integration, as a principle, emphasizes that risk management should be an integral part of all organizational activities, including decision-making. This means that risk considerations are not an add-on but are embedded within the design and execution of processes, strategies, and policies. For an internal auditor, assessing the effectiveness of integration involves examining whether risk management activities are woven into the fabric of the organization's operations and governance, rather than being a standalone function. This includes how risk appetite and tolerance are considered in strategic planning, how risk is factored into project management methodologies, and how risk information informs operational decisions. The other options represent different aspects of risk management, but do not specifically address the core concept of integration as defined by the standard's principles. Ensuring that risk management is a part of all organizational activities, including strategic planning and decision-making, directly reflects the integration principle. Question 7. During an audit of an organization's risk management framework, an internal auditor is reviewing the documented process for establishing the context. The organization operates in a highly regulated sector with evolving international trade agreements and faces significant technological disruption from emerging market competitors. Internally, the organization has recently undergone a significant restructuring and is implementing a new enterprise resource planning system. What is the primary purpose of the internal auditor's review of how these specific external and internal factors have been integrated into the risk management context? Option A. To confirm that all potential risks arising from technological advancements and market competition have been comprehensively listed in the risk register. Option B. To evaluate the adequacy of the organization's compliance with specific clauses of the ISO 31000-2018 standard related to risk identification methodologies. Option C. To verify that the risk management framework is aligned with the organization's strategic objectives and operational realities, ensuring that identified risks and controls are relevant and effective. Option D. To assess the efficiency of the risk management team's communication channels with external regulatory bodies and internal IT departments. The correct answer is C. To verify that the risk management framework is aligned with the organization's strategic objectives and operational realities, ensuring that identified risks and controls are relevant and effective. Explanation. ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes understanding the organizational context as a foundational step in risk management. This involves identifying external and internal factors relevant to the organization's objectives. External context includes environmental, social, political, legal, economic, technological, and competitive factors. Internal context encompasses organizational culture, governance, structure, strategies, policies, processes, and resources. The purpose of this understanding is to define the scope and boundaries of the risk management process and to inform the risk criteria. An internal auditor's role is to assess whether this context has been adequately established and is being used effectively to guide risk identification, analysis, and evaluation. This involves examining how the organization has considered its operating environment, stakeholder expectations, regulatory obligations, and its own capabilities and limitations when setting up its risk management framework. The effectiveness of the risk management system is directly linked to the thoroughness of this contextual analysis. Question 8. When auditing an organization that has implemented integrated management systems based on the high-level structure, HLS, principles such as ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, what is the most effective approach for an internal auditor to assess the alignment and application of ISO 31000, 2018 principles and guidelines within the overall risk management framework? Option A. Review the organization's formal risk management policy and procedure documents to ensure they explicitly reference ISO 31000, 2018, and its core principles, without necessarily examining the practical implementation or integration with other management systems. Option B. Assess the organization's risk appetite statement and risk tolerance levels against industry benchmarks, ensuring adherence to ISO 31000, 2018 guidance on risk appetite, while paying minimal attention to how these are incorporated into the operational aspects of other management systems. Option C. Evaluate the extent to which the organization's risk management processes, as defined by ISO 31000, 2018, are embedded within the planning, operational, and performance evaluation clauses of the HLS compliance standards, ensuring consistency and synergy across different management system aspects. Option D. Focus solely on the specific risk assessment methodologies documented within the organization's risk register, verifying compliance with ISO 31000, 2018 clauses related to risk identification and analysis, irrespective of their integration with other management system processes. The correct answer is C. Evaluate the extent to which the organization's risk management processes, as defined by ISO 31000, 2018, are embedded within the planning, operational, and performance evaluation clauses of the HLS compliance standards, ensuring consistency and synergy across different management system aspects. Explanation. The question probes the understanding of how ISO 31000, 2018, as a framework for managing risk, integrates with other management system standards that often adopt a high-level structure, HLS, such as ISO 9001, Quality Management, and ISO 14001, Environmental Management. The HLS, also known as Annex SL, provides a common structure, terminology, and core text for management system standards. This commonality facilitates the integration of multiple management systems into a single, cohesive framework. ISO 31000, 2018, while not a certifiable standard like ISO 9001 or ISO 14001, offers principles and guidelines that can be applied to enhance the risk management processes within these integrated systems. The core of the integration lies in aligning the risk management activities described in ISO 31000 with the requirements for context of the organization, leadership commitment, planning, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement found in HLS-based standards. For instance, the identification and assessment of risks to the achievement of objectives, a central tenet of ISO 31000, directly supports the planning requirements of ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 by informing the actions needed to address risks and opportunities. The systematic application of ISO 31000 principles and processes within an HLS framework ensures that risk management is embedded into the organization's overall strategy and operations, rather than being a standalone activity. This approach leverages the common clauses of the HLS to streamline documentation, audits, and management reviews, leading to greater efficiency and effectiveness in managing risks across different organizational functions and objectives. The key is to recognize that ISO 31000 provides the how-to for risk management, which can be seamlessly incorporated into the what and why of HLS standards. Question 9. An internal auditor is examining the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework concerning its defined risk criteria. The organization operates in a highly regulated sector and has articulated a desire to be a market leader in sustainable innovation. However, during the audit, it becomes apparent that the criteria for acceptable levels of environmental compliance risk and the appetite for investment in novel, unproven green technologies are vague and lack measurable benchmarks. Which of the following best describes the auditor's primary concern regarding the establishment of these risk criteria? Option A. The risk appetite for innovation is too high, indicating a potential for excessive resource allocation to speculative ventures without adequate risk mitigation. Option B. The organization has failed to consider the legal and regulatory requirements, which is a fundamental oversight in establishing any risk criteria. Option C. The risk criteria are not sufficiently specific or measurable to guide risk assessment and decision-making, potentially leading to inconsistent application and failure to align with strategic objectives. Option D. The risk tolerance for environmental compliance is too low, suggesting an overly cautious approach that may stifle necessary operational adjustments. The correct answer is C. The risk criteria are not sufficiently specific or measurable to guide risk assessment and decision-making, potentially leading to inconsistent application and failure to align with strategic objectives. Explanation. The core of defining risk criteria, particularly in relation to risk appetite and tolerance, lies in establishing the organization's willingness to pursue or retain risk. Risk appetite defines the amount and type of risk an organization is willing to take to achieve its objectives. Risk tolerance, on the other hand, specifies the acceptable level of variation around a particular objective or risk. When an internal auditor reviews the establishment of risk criteria, they are assessing how these concepts are operationalized within the organization's risk management framework. This involves verifying that the criteria are clearly defined, communicated, and integrated into decision-making processes. The auditor would look for evidence that the organization has considered its strategic objectives, its legal and regulatory obligations, and its overall risk capacity when setting these criteria. Specifically, the auditor would evaluate whether the risk criteria are sufficiently specific to guide risk assessment and treatment decisions. For instance, a criterion might state that the organization will not tolerate a financial loss exceeding a certain threshold for any single operational incident, or that it has an appetite for innovation risk up to a defined percentage of its annual research and development budget. The auditor's role is to ensure that these criteria are not merely aspirational statements, but are practical benchmarks used to manage risk effectively, thereby supporting the achievement of organizational objectives. The focus is on the qualitative and quantitative measures that reflect the organization's attitude towards risk, ensuring alignment with its strategic direction and stakeholder expectations. Question 10. During an audit of a financial institution's operational risk framework, an internal auditor identifies that a previously documented risk treatment plan for a cybersecurity vulnerability has been implemented. The plan included deploying enhanced multi-factor authentication and conducting mandatory employee training. The auditor's objective is to assess the effectiveness of these corrective actions in mitigating the identified risk. Which of the following approaches would be most appropriate for the auditor to verify the efficacy of the implemented corrective actions in accordance with ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. Interviewing the IT security team to confirm that the corrective actions were completed according to the documented plan, without further investigation into their impact. Option B. Examining the original risk register entry for the cybersecurity vulnerability and comparing it to the current status, assuming that implementation equates to effectiveness. Option C. Requesting a formal sign-off from the risk owner that the corrective actions have been completed, without independently verifying their operational impact or employee comprehension. Option D. Reviewing post-implementation system logs to confirm the successful deployment of multi-factor authentication and analyzing employee training completion records alongside a sample of phishing simulation results to gauge awareness levels. The correct answer is D. Reviewing post-implementation system logs to confirm the successful deployment of multi-factor authentication and analyzing employee training completion records alongside a sample of phishing simulation results to gauge awareness levels. Explanation: the effectiveness of risk management relies on a continuous cycle of improvement, where identified risks are treated and the outcomes of those treatments are monitored. ISO 31000, 2018 emphasizes that monitoring and review are integral to the entire risk management process, not merely a concluding step. When an internal auditor assesses the implementation of corrective actions arising from risk treatment plans, they are specifically evaluating the ongoing effectiveness and the integration of these actions into the organization's operations. This involves verifying that the actions taken have indeed reduced the risk to an acceptable level or have mitigated its potential impact. It also requires ensuring that the actions themselves do not introduce new, unacceptable risks. The auditor must confirm that the original risk assessment and treatment plan remain relevant and that the implemented actions are achieving their intended purpose. This is a crucial step in assuring the organization that its risk management framework is functioning as designed and contributing to the achievement of its objectives. The process of monitoring corrective actions is a direct indicator of the maturity and operationalization of the risk management system, providing assurance that the organization is proactively managing its risks. Question 11. An internal auditor is reviewing an organization's risk assessment process for its critical IT infrastructure. The organization has a documented policy stating that a cyber attack resulting in a complete system outage for over 24 hours is considered a major consequence. However, during the audit, the auditor finds that a recent, localized ransomware incident, which caused a 12-hour outage for a single department, is also categorized as major by the risk owners. The auditor also notes that the likelihood scale uses terms like possible for events expected to occur once every 2-5 years. Considering the principles of ISO 31000, 2018 for risk assessment, what is the most critical deficiency the auditor should identify in the organization's approach to analyzing likelihood and consequence? Option A. Failure to involve external cybersecurity experts in the assessment of IT-related risks, thus compromising the accuracy of consequence evaluations. Option B. Inconsistent application of consequence criteria and an insufficiently granular likelihood scale, leading to potential misprioritization of risks. Option C. Over-reliance on qualitative descriptors for likelihood, neglecting the need for quantitative probability data in risk assessment. Option D. Insufficiently stringent likelihood thresholds, allowing for the overestimation of the probability of minor incidents occurring. The correct answer is B. Inconsistent application of consequence criteria and an insufficiently granular likelihood scale, leading to potential misprioritization of risks. Explanation: the core of assessing risk involves understanding both the likelihood of a risk event occurring and the potential consequence if it does. ISO 31000, 2018 emphasizes that these are not independent variables and their assessment requires context. When an internal auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework, they must ascertain how the organization has established and applied its criteria for risk assessment, particularly regarding the qualitative and quantitative methods used to determine likelihood and consequence levels. The auditor's role is to verify that these methods are appropriate for the organization's objectives and operating environment, and that they are consistently applied. This involves examining the evidence used to support the assigned likelihood and consequence ratings, ensuring they are based on objective data, expert judgment, or historical trends as appropriate. The auditor also checks if the organization has defined clear scales for likelihood, e.g., rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain, and consequence, e.g., negligible, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic, and if these scales are well understood and applied across different risk categories. A robust approach considers the interconnectedness of risks and how a single event might trigger multiple consequences, or how multiple events might contribute to a larger consequence. The auditor's objective is to confirm that the risk assessment process, including the determination of likelihood and consequence, is sufficiently rigorous to inform decision-making and the prioritization of risk treatment. Question 12. An internal auditor is assessing an organization's risk management framework in accordance with ISO 31000, 2018. The auditor is examining the processes established for monitoring and review. Which of the following activities would be most indicative of a robust and effective monitoring and review process as stipulated by the standard? Option A. Relying solely on external audit findings to identify deficiencies in the risk management framework's implementation. Option B. reviewing historical risk registers from previous years to identify trends without assessing the current effectiveness of implemented controls. Option C. Conducting an annual workshop where stakeholders discuss potential future risks without systematically tracking the mitigation actions for current identified risks. Option D. Regularly comparing the residual risk levels against the defined risk appetite and verifying the timely implementation of agreed-upon risk treatment plans based on performance indicators. The correct answer is D. Regularly comparing the residual risk levels against the defined risk appetite and verifying the timely implementation of agreed-upon risk treatment plans based on performance indicators. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes the iterative nature of risk management, where monitoring and review are crucial for ensuring the effectiveness of the risk management framework and its application. Clause 6. Monitoring and review outlines the necessity for organizations to continually monitor and review the risk management framework and its outcomes. This involves assessing whether the controls are effective, whether the risk appetite has changed, and if new risks have emerged. The internal auditor's role is to provide assurance that these processes are functioning as intended and contributing to the achievement of organizational objectives. A key aspect of this is verifying that the monitoring activities are designed to capture relevant information about the performance of risk treatments and the overall risk landscape. This includes checking if the metrics used are appropriate, if the frequency of monitoring is sufficient, and if the feedback loops are established to inform decision-making and necessary adjustments to the risk management process. The internal auditor must consider the organization's specific context and objectives when evaluating the adequacy of these monitoring and review mechanisms. The output of the review process should lead to improvements in the risk management framework and its application, ensuring its ongoing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. This aligns with the principles of continual improvement inherent in effective management systems. Question 13. An internal auditor is reviewing the risk management framework of a multinational logistics company, Global Move Inc., which is seeking to expand its operations into 3 new emerging markets. The auditor's objective is to assess the effectiveness of how Global Move Inc. has established its external and internal context for this strategic initiative. Which of the following findings would indicate the most significant deficiency in the establishment of the organization's context as per ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. The internal context documentation did not detail the specific decision-making authority levels for risk acceptance related to operational disruptions, relying instead on general management guidelines. Option B. The external context assessment identified potential geopolitical instability in one of the target markets, but did not quantify the financial impact of a complete market withdrawal. Option C. The risk management policy, while comprehensive, did not specifically reference the company's stated commitment to environmental sustainability as a guiding principle for risk treatment. Option D. The internal context analysis failed to explicitly consider the impact of the organization's recently implemented Agile project management methodology on its risk appetite for new technology adoption. Correct answer is D. The internal context analysis failed to explicitly consider the impact of the organization's recently implemented Agile project management methodology on its risk appetite for new technology adoption. Explanation: the establishment of the external and internal context of an organization is a foundational step in the risk management process, as outlined in ISO 31000-2018. This phase involves understanding the environment in which the organization operates and the specific objectives it aims to achieve. The internal context encompasses aspects such as the organization's culture, governance, structure, capabilities, information systems, decision-making processes, and contractual relationships. The external context includes the socio-cultural, political, legal, economic, environmental, and technological factors that influence the organization. Additionally, the organization's objectives, strategies, and the risk appetite defined by top management are crucial elements to consider within both contexts. An internal auditor evaluating the establishment of this context would focus on whether these elements have been systematically identified, analyzed, and documented to support the subsequent risk assessment and treatment activities. The auditor would look for evidence that the process of defining the context is integrated with the organization's strategic planning and governance. This includes assessing how the organization considers its stakeholders, their needs and expectations, and how these are factored into the risk management framework. The effectiveness of the risk management framework is directly linked to the thoroughness and accuracy of the context establishment. For instance, if the internal context fails to adequately capture the organization's capacity for innovation, subsequent risk treatments related to technological disruption might be unrealistic. Similarly, ignoring a significant regulatory change in the external context could lead to non-compliance risks being overlooked. The auditor's role is to provide assurance that the context setting is robust enough to ensure the risk management process is relevant and effective in achieving the organization's objectives. Question 14. An internal audit of a financial institution's operational risk framework reveals that a previously identified high-impact, low-probability risk associated with a new digital payment system has not been adequately mitigated by the implemented control measures. The audit report notes that the existing controls, designed to prevent unauthorized access, are proving insufficient due to evolving cyber threats. The risk treatment plan had focused on technical safeguards, considering the principles outlined in ISO 31000-2018 regarding the follow-up and review of risk treatments. What is the most appropriate primary action for the internal auditor to recommend to address this situation? Option A. Recommend a review and potential revision of the existing risk treatment plan, focusing on enhancing or replacing the ineffective controls and potentially exploring alternative treatment options. Option B. Suggest a comprehensive re-identification of all operational risks across the entire organization to ensure no other critical risks have been overlooked. Option C. Advise the organization to reassess the risk appetite statement to determine if the current risk level is now acceptable given the implemented controls. Option D. Mandate the immediate cessation of the digital payment system until a completely new risk assessment and treatment plan can be developed and approved. The correct answer is A. Recommend a review and potential revision of the existing risk treatment plan, focusing on enhancing or replacing the ineffective controls and potentially exploring alternative treatment options. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes the iterative nature of risk management. Following the implementation of risk treatments, a crucial step is the review and assessment of the effectiveness of these treatments. This involves determining whether the risks have been reduced to an acceptable level and if the implemented controls are functioning as intended. If the review indicates that the risk level remains unacceptable or that the treatments are not effective, then corrective actions are necessary. These corrective actions are not about re-identifying risks, but rather about modifying or re-implementing the risk treatment plans. The process involves analyzing why the initial treatments failed to achieve the desired outcome and developing new or revised strategies. This continuous improvement cycle ensures that the risk management framework remains dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances. Therefore, when an internal auditor finds that implemented risk treatments have not effectively reduced a significant risk, the primary focus of follow-up should be on the adequacy and execution of the risk treatment plan itself, leading to the necessary adjustments or replacements of those treatments. This aligns with the principle of ensuring that the risk management process leads to tangible improvements in risk reduction. Question 15. During an internal audit of an organization's risk management framework, an auditor is examining the risk analysis process for a newly implemented operational procedure. The organization has adopted a qualitative risk assessment approach using a 5x5 matrix. The auditor's objective is to verify the robustness of the risk evaluation criteria. Which of the following audit findings would indicate a deficiency in the risk analysis phase according to ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. The organization has not clearly defined the specific parameters and thresholds for each level of the likelihood and consequence scales used in the 5x5 matrix, leading to inconsistent risk rating assignments. Option B. The auditor found that the organization's risk treatment plan did not fully address all high-priority risks identified during the analysis phase. Option C. The risk analysis report did not include a detailed quantitative assessment of the financial impact for each identified risk, despite the availability of granular financial data. Option D. The risk analysis for the new procedure failed to identify all potential risks due to an over-reliance on historical data without considering emerging threats. Correct answer is A. The organization has not clearly defined the specific parameters and thresholds for each level of the likelihood and consequence scales used in the 5x5 matrix, leading to inconsistent risk rating assignments. Explanation: the internal auditor's role in assessing the risk analysis process, as outlined in ISO 31000-2018, involves evaluating the methods used to identify, analyze, and evaluate risks. The standard emphasizes that the risk analysis should be appropriate to the context and the nature of the risk. When auditing the risk analysis phase, an auditor must verify that the organization has established clear criteria for risk evaluation, including the scales for likelihood and consequence. These criteria should be consistently applied. The auditor would examine the documented risk assessment methodology to ensure it aligns with the organization's risk appetite and tolerance levels, and that the chosen analysis techniques, e.g., qualitative, quantitative, semi-quantitative, are suitable for the types of risks being assessed and the available data. A key aspect of the audit is to confirm that the results of the risk analysis are then used to inform risk treatment decisions. For instance, if an organization uses a qualitative approach with a 5x5 risk matrix, the auditor would check if the defined levels for likelihood e.g., rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain, and consequence, e.g., insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic, are clearly articulated, and if the resulting risk ratings are used to prioritize risks. The auditor would also look for evidence that the risk analysis considers internal and external factors, as well as the interdependencies between risks. The effectiveness of the risk analysis is judged by its ability to provide a sound basis for decision-making regarding risk treatment and the overall risk management framework. The auditor is not to reperform the risk analysis, but to assess the adequacy and effectiveness of the organization's process for conducting it. This includes reviewing the competence of personnel involved in the risk analysis and the quality of the data used. Question 16. An internal auditor is assessing the effectiveness of risk management integration within the strategic planning framework of a multinational conglomerate, Veridian Dynamics. The organization's board has approved a new 5-year strategic plan aimed at significant market expansion into emerging economies. During the audit, the auditor observes that while the strategic plan outlines ambitious growth targets, the documented risk appetite statement, approved by the board, is vague and lacks specific quantitative or qualitative parameters related to market entry risks, political instability, or currency fluctuations. Furthermore, the Strategic Planning Committee's meeting minutes reveal that discussions about potential risks were largely confined to operational feasibility rather than strategic alignment, with the organization's stated willingness to accept risk. Which of the following findings by the internal auditor would most strongly indicate a deficiency in the integration of risk management into Veridian Dynamics' organizational strategy, according to ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. The strategic plan's objectives are not demonstrably linked to the organization's stated risk appetite, and risk considerations were not a primary driver in selecting the strategic initiatives for market expansion. Option B. The organization has a robust process for identifying operational risks associated with new market entry, but lacks a formal risk register for strategic opportunities. Option C. The Strategic Planning Committee members have not undergone formal risk management training, as per the organization's internal policy for committee members. Option D. The risk management policy document does not explicitly mention the role of the audit committee in overseeing strategic risk. The correct answer is A. The strategic plan's objectives are not demonstrably linked to the organization's stated risk appetite, and risk considerations were not a primary driver in selecting the strategic initiatives for market expansion. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that risk management should be an integral part of an organization's governance, strategy, and decision-making processes. For an internal auditor evaluating the integration of risk management into organizational strategy, the focus is on whether risk appetite and tolerance are clearly articulated and understood across all strategic planning and execution activities. This involves assessing if strategic objectives are formulated with an awareness of potential risks and opportunities, and if risk management considerations directly influence the selection and prioritization of strategic initiatives. The auditor looks for evidence that the organization's strategic direction is shaped by its ability and willingness to take risks, as defined by its risk appetite. This means that the strategic planning process itself should incorporate risk assessment, and that the chosen strategies should be aligned with the organization's risk capacity. Without a clear understanding and application of risk appetite in strategic formulation, the integration is superficial. The presence of a documented risk appetite statement that is actively used in strategic decision-making, and evidence of risk-informed adjustments to strategic plans based on changing internal or external contexts, are key indicators of effective integration. The auditor would also examine how risk information is communicated to decision-makers at the strategic level, and how it influences the commitment of resources to strategic goals. Question 17. An internal auditor is reviewing the risk treatment decisions made by a global logistics company regarding the potential disruption of its primary shipping routes due to geopolitical instability. The company's executive board approved a significant investment in diversifying its fleet and exploring alternative routes, a decision that impacts operational capacity, financial projections, and employee roles across various departments. Which of the following actions by the internal auditor best demonstrates adherence to the principles of ISO 31000-2018 concerning consultation on risk decisions? Option A. Assessing the financial viability of the diversified fleet and alternative routes against industry benchmarks without verifying the extent of stakeholder engagement in the decision-making process. Option B. Evaluating the technical feasibility of the new shipping routes based on expert reports, assuming that the executive board's decision inherently reflects adequate consultation. Option C. Examining the company's crisis communication plan to ensure it adequately addresses potential public relations issues arising from route changes, irrespective of the internal consultation process. Option D. Reviewing the documented process by which the executive board gathered input from departmental heads, supply chain managers, and the legal department prior to approving the risk treatment plan. The correct answer is D. Reviewing the documented process by which the executive board gathered input from departmental heads, supply chain managers, and the legal department prior to approving the risk treatment plan. Explanation. ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that risk management is an integral part of organizational governance and leadership. When considering decisions about risk treatment, especially those that involve significant changes to strategy or operations, consulting with relevant stakeholders is paramount. This consultation ensures that decisions are informed by diverse perspectives, expertise, and understanding of the potential impacts. It also fosters buy-in and facilitates effective implementation of chosen risk treatments. The standard promotes a structured approach to risk management, and this includes the communication and consultation aspects. Effective consultation involves identifying who needs to be involved, understanding their interests and concerns, and providing them with clear, timely, and accessible information. The goal is not to achieve consensus on every point, but rather to ensure that all relevant viewpoints are considered before a final decision is made. This process supports the principle of risk management being iterative and dynamic, adapting to changing internal and external contexts. Furthermore, regulatory frameworks often mandate stakeholder engagement in decision-making processes, particularly where public interest or significant environmental impacts are involved, aligning with the principles of good governance and accountability that ISO 31000 supports. Question 18. Consider a large-scale public transportation project facing numerous uncertainties, including fluctuating material prices, unpredictable weather patterns affecting construction schedules, and potential regulatory changes impacting environmental compliance. The project management team has decided to employ a quantitative risk analysis technique to better understand the potential impact on project completion time and budget. Which of the following techniques is most appropriate for generating a probabilistic range of outcomes by repeatedly sampling from defined probability distributions of these uncertain variables? Option A. Fault tree analysis, FTA. Option B. Sensitivity analysis. Option C. Monte Carlo simulation. Option D. Failure mode and effects analysis, FME. The correct answer is C. Monte Carlo simulation. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 31000-2018 regarding risk assessment is to develop a clear understanding of the risks faced by an organization. When considering quantitative risk analysis techniques, particularly for complex projects with multiple uncertainties, A Monte Carlo simulation is often employed. This method involves running a model multiple times with different random inputs drawn from specified probability distributions. The outcome of each run represents a possible scenario. By aggregating the results from thousands or millions of these simulations, the technique generates a probability distribution of potential outcomes. This allows for a more robust understanding of the likelihood and impact of various risk events, moving beyond simple point estimates. For instance, if assessing the potential cost overrun of a new infrastructure project, a Monte Carlo simulation could model variations in material costs, labor availability, and construction timelines, providing a range of possible total costs with associated probabilities, rather than a single predicted cost. This probabilistic output is crucial for informed decision-making, enabling the organization to set contingency budgets and develop more effective risk response strategies. It directly supports the ISO 31000 emphasis on establishing a comprehensive and evidence-based risk profile. Question 19. An internal audit of a multinational logistics company, Global Freight Solutions, reveals that while the organization has established a risk management framework aligned with ISO 31000-2018, the risk treatment plans developed by various departments, such as route optimization and warehouse security, are not consistently traceable to specific, measurable organizational objectives or key performance indicators. For instance, a plan to mitigate the risk of fuel price volatility for the route optimization department has been created, but it is not explicitly tied to the company's objective of reducing operational costs by 5% in the next fiscal year, nor is its effectiveness measured against a defined metric. What is the most significant implication of this finding for the internal auditor's assessment of the risk management framework's effectiveness? Option A. The risk management framework may not be effectively integrated into strategic decision-making processes, potentially leading to misaligned risk treatments and inefficient resource allocation. Option B. The internal auditor should recommend the immediate cessation of all risk treatment activities until a more robust objective setting process is implemented across all departments. Option C. The organization is likely to face immediate regulatory penalties for noncompliance with specific clauses of ISO 31000-2018 related to risk treatment documentation. Option D. The audit finding suggests a lack of comprehensive risk identification, as treatment plans are being developed without a clear understanding of the risk's impact on objectives. The correct answer is A. The risk management framework may not be effectively integrated into strategic decision-making processes, potentially leading to misaligned risk treatments and inefficient resource allocation. Explanation: the internal auditor's role in assessing the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework, as per ISO 31000-2018, involves evaluating how well the framework is integrated into the organization's activities and how it supports the achievement of objectives. When an auditor observes that risk treatment plans are being developed but are not consistently linked to specific organizational objectives or performance indicators, this indicates a potential deficiency in the framework's integration and effectiveness. ISO 31000 emphasizes that risk management should be an integral part of all organizational activities, including decision-making and strategic planning. The linkage of risk treatments to objectives ensures that the resources allocated to managing risks are focused on those that could most significantly impact the achievement of desired outcomes. Without this linkage, risk treatment activities might be disconnected from strategic priorities, leading to inefficient resource allocation or a failure to address the most critical risks. The auditor's finding points to a gap in ensuring that risk treatments contribute directly to achieving organizational goals, which is a core tenet of a robust and effective risk management system. This observation suggests that, while the process of identifying and treating risks exists, its strategic alignment and impact measurement may be weak. The auditor would need to explore the extent of this disconnect and its potential consequences on the organization's ability to achieve its objectives. Question 20. During an audit of a multinational logistics company, an internal auditor is tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of its risk management framework in supporting the strategic objective of expanding operations into 3 new emerging markets within the next fiscal year. The framework includes documented risk appetite statements, risk criteria for evaluating potential opportunities and threats, and a process for risk treatment selection. What specific aspect of the risk management framework's alignment with this objective should the auditor prioritize for in-depth examination? Option A. The comprehensiveness of the risk register enlisting all conceivable risks across the entire organization, irrespective of their direct relevance to the stated strategic objective of market expansion. Option B. The extent to which the identified risks and their associated treatment directly address potential impediments to market entry and operational establishment in the target emerging markets, and whether these are prioritized according to their impact on the expansion objective. Option C. The frequency of risk management committee meetings and the number of risk mitigation plans that have been approved, without a specific correlation to the strategic objective's success. Option D. The adherence of the risk management process to the procedural steps outlined in the organization's risk management policy, even if these steps do not demonstrably link to the achievement of the market expansion objective. The correct answer is B. The extent to which the identified risks and their associated treatments directly address potential impediments to market entry and operational establishment in the target emerging markets, and whether these are prioritized according to their impact on the expansion objective. Explanation. The core of assessing the alignment of a risk management framework with organizational objectives, as per ISO 31000-2018, lies in ensuring that the framework actively supports the achievement of these objectives. This involves a systematic review of how risk appetite and tolerance are defined in relation to strategic goals, how risk criteria are established to measure performance against these objectives, and how the integration of risk management into decision-making processes directly contributes to realizing the intended outcomes. An internal auditor would scrutinize whether the identified risks are those that could impact the achievement of objectives, and whether the risk treatment plans are designed to enhance the likelihood of success. The auditor would look for evidence that the risk management process is not a standalone activity, but is embedded within the organization's governance, strategy setting, and operational planning. For instance, if an objective is to increase market share by 15% within 2 years, the risk management framework should identify and manage risks such as competitor actions, regulatory changes affecting market entry, or internal capacity constraints that could hinder this growth. The auditor's assessment would focus on the direct linkage between the identified risks, the controls implemented, and the ultimate impact on achieving the stated market share objective. This requires an understanding of the organization's strategic planning documents, performance metrics, and the documented risk management policies and procedures to ascertain their interconnectedness and effectiveness in supporting the strategic direction. The auditor must verify that the framework facilitates informed decision-making that prioritizes actions which best contribute to the strategic goals, rather than merely managing a generic set of risks. Question 21. An internal audit team is reviewing the risk management process at a global financial services firm that operates under stringent regulatory requirements, including those mandated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the European Securities and Markets Authority, ESMA. The firm has conducted a detailed risk analysis for a new digital asset trading platform, identifying potential operational and cybersecurity risks. The analysis quantifies the likelihood and impact of various scenarios, resulting in a risk rating for each. The audit team's objective is to assess the effectiveness of the risk treatment decisions made by management. Considering ISO 31000-2018 principles, what is the primary consideration for the internal auditor when evaluating whether the risk analysis results have been appropriately addressed by management? Option A. Examination of the internal audit team's own risk assessment of the digital asset trading platform's potential vulnerabilities. Option B. Assessment of whether the risk analysis results align with the risk ratings of similar platforms in competing financial institutions. Option C. Confirmation that the risk analysis used the most sophisticated quantitative modeling techniques available in the industry. Option D. Verification that the risk analysis outputs have been compared against the organization's established risk criteria and risk appetite. Correct answer is D. Verification that the risk analysis outputs have been compared against the organization's established risk criteria and risk appetite. Explanation. The core principle when comparing risk analysis results with established risk criteria is to determine whether the identified risks exceed the organization's defined tolerance levels or appetite for risk. ISO 31000, 2018 emphasizes that risk criteria should be consistent with the organization's objectives, policies, and legal/regulatory obligations. When an internal auditor reviews risk analysis outputs, the primary objective is to verify that the evaluation of risk likelihood and consequence has been conducted against these predefined criteria. If the analysis indicates that a particular risk's potential impact or probability, when combined, results in a level that is unacceptable according to the organization's established risk appetite, then further treatment or mitigation is warranted. This comparison is not about recalculating the risk level, but about assessing its significance in relation to what the organization has deemed acceptable. Therefore, the most appropriate action for an internal auditor to take is to confirm that the risk analysis outcomes have been evaluated against these established criteria, ensuring alignment with the organization's risk management framework and its stated risk appetite. This involves checking if the risk treatment decisions or the acceptance of residual risk are justified based on the comparison. Question 22. An internal audit of an organization's risk management framework, aligned with ISO 31000, 2018 principles, revealed that while risks are identified and assessed, the documented risk appetite statement is rarely revisited or disseminated to key decision-making personnel. Considering the auditor's mandate to suggest enhancements to the framework's effectiveness and efficiency, which of the following recommendations would most directly address this systemic observation? Option A. Conduct training sessions for employees on the general principles of risk management. Option B. Implement a formal process for the periodic review and communication of the risk appetite statement to relevant stakeholders. Option C. Develop a comprehensive register of all identified risks with detailed mitigation plans. Option D. Enhance the risk assessment methodology to include a broader range of potential risk sources. The correct answer is B. Implement a formal process for the periodic review and communication of the risk appetite statement to relevant stakeholders. Explanation: the internal auditor's role in making recommendations for improvement within a risk management framework, as guided by ISO 31000, 2018, is to ensure the framework's effectiveness, efficiency, and alignment with organizational objectives. Recommendations should be actionable, specific, and focused on enhancing the risk management process itself, rather than merely identifying risks. When an auditor observes that the risk appetite statement is not regularly reviewed or communicated, it indicates a potential gap in governance and oversight of the risk management framework. A robust framework requires that the risk appetite be a living document, understood and applied across the organization. Therefore, the most pertinent recommendation would be to establish a formal process for the periodic review and communication of the risk appetite statement. This ensures that the organization's tolerance for risk is kept current with its strategic direction and operating environment, and that decision-makers are consistently informed of these boundaries. Other potential recommendations might address specific risk treatments or the identification of new risks, but the question focuses on the improvement of the framework's foundational elements. The lack of a review process for the risk appetite statement suggests a weakness in the design and implementation of the framework itself, which is a primary area for auditor recommendations. Question 23. During an audit of a multinational logistics firm's risk management framework, an internal auditor is reviewing the methods used to identify potential disruption to their global supply chain operations. The firm has implemented a combination of historical data analysis, expert interviews with regional managers, and regular scenario planning workshops focusing on geopolitical instability and natural disasters. The auditor needs to evaluate the comprehensiveness and suitability of these techniques in identifying a broad spectrum of risks relevant to the firm's objectives, considering the dynamic nature of the industry and the potential for unforeseen events. Which of the following best describes the auditor's primary focus when assessing the effectiveness of these risk identification techniques according to ISO 31000, 2018? Option A. Evaluating the cost-effectiveness of each identification technique relative to the number of risks uncovered. Option B. Verifying that the identified risks are clearly articulated, their sources understood, and potential consequences considered within the organization's defined risk appetite. Option C. Confirming the number of risks identified in each category, e.g., operational, strategic, financial, to ensure statistical representation. Option D, ensuring that all identified risks are immediately prioritized based on their perceived likelihood, without further analysis. The correct answer is B, verifying that the identified risks are clearly articulated, their sources understood, and potential consequences considered within the organization's defined risk appetite. Explanation: the effectiveness of risk identification techniques is assessed by an internal auditor against the principles and guidelines of ISO 31000-2018. The standard emphasizes that risk identification should be an iterative process that aims to find, recognize, and describe risks that might affect the achievement of objectives. It's not about simply listing potential problems, but about understanding their nature and potential impact within the organization's context. An auditor would evaluate whether the methods employed are suitable for the organization's specific circumstances, including its complexity, activity, and the nature of its objectives. Techniques like brainstorming, checklists, interviews, and scenario analysis are commonly used. However, the auditor's focus is on the quality and appropriateness of these techniques in uncovering a comprehensive set of risks, rather than the mere application of a technique. This involves verifying that the identified risks are clearly defined, that the sources of risk are understood, and that the potential consequences are considered, all within the established framework of the organization's risk management process. The auditor is looking for evidence that the identification process is systematic, thorough, and aligned with the organization's risk appetite and tolerance. The primary goal is to ensure that the organization has a robust foundation for subsequent risk assessment and treatment, by effectively identifying all relevant potential risks. Question 24. An internal audit team is reviewing an organization's process for prioritizing risks identified during a recent enterprise-wide risk assessment. The organization has a matrix that plots likelihood against impact, with a qualitative scale for both. The team observes that several high-impact, high-likelihood risks have been assigned lower treatment priority than some medium-impact, medium-likelihood risks. What is the most critical aspect for the internal auditor to focus on when evaluating this discrepancy in risk prioritization for treatment selection? Option A, determining the specific regulatory requirements that mandate a particular order for addressing risks within the industry. Option B, verifying that the criteria used for prioritization are clearly defined, consistently applied, and aligned with the organization's risk appetite and objectives. Option C, assessing the technical expertise of the personnel who developed the risk matrix and assigned the likelihood and impact ratings. Option D, evaluating the cost-benefit analysis performed for each proposed risk treatment, regardless of the risk's priority level. The correct answer is B, verifying that the criteria used for prioritization are clearly defined, consistently applied, and aligned with the organization's risk appetite and objectives. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018, in its principles and framework, emphasizes that risk treatment should be selected and implemented based on the outcome of the risk assessment and prioritization process. The selection of risk treatments is not arbitrary. It must align with the organization's objectives and risk appetite. When an internal auditor reviews the prioritization of risks for treatment, they are assessing whether the organization has effectively identified and ranked risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, considering the established criteria. This prioritization directly informs which risks warrant the most immediate and substantial treatment efforts. The auditor's role is to verify that the decision-making process for allocating resources to risk treatments is logical, consistent with the risk assessment findings, and supports the achievement of organizational goals. This involves examining the criteria used for prioritization, such as the severity of consequences, the probability of occurrence, and the organization's tolerance for specific risk exposures, ensuring these are clearly defined and applied. Furthermore, the auditor would look for evidence that the chosen treatments are appropriate for the prioritized risks, and that the rationale for their selection is documented and defensible, considering factors like cost-effectiveness and the potential for residual risk. Question 25. During an audit of a financial institution's cybersecurity risk management framework, an internal auditor observes that while a multi-factor authentication control is in place for remote access, a significant number of privileged accounts still rely solely on password-based authentication. The audit also notes that the frequency of security awareness training for employees has decreased over the past year. Considering the principles of ISO 31000-2018 for assessing risk management control effectiveness, which of the following conclusions would most accurately reflect the auditor's findings regarding the control environment and its impact on risk mitigation? Option A. The presence of multi-factor authentication for remote access indicates a robust control, and the issue with privileged accounts is a minor oversight that does not significantly impact the overall risk posture. Option B. The auditor should focus solely on the technical implementation of multi-factor authentication, as the frequency of training is a separate operational concern outside the scope of risk control effectiveness assessment. Option C. The decrease in training frequency is a procedural anomaly and does not directly correlate with the effectiveness of the implemented technical controls, suggesting that the risk mitigation remains adequate. Option D. The control environment exhibits weaknesses in the consistent application of security policies and a decline in proactive risk mitigation efforts, potentially leading to an increased exposure to cyber threats. The correct answer is D. The control environment exhibits weaknesses in the consistent application of security policies and a decline in proactive risk mitigation efforts, potentially leading to an increased exposure to cyber threats. Explanation: the effectiveness of risk management controls is assessed by examining their design and operational suitability in achieving the intended risk treatment outcomes. This involves evaluating whether the controls are appropriately selected, implemented, and functioning as intended to mitigate identified risks to an acceptable level. The internal auditor must consider the control environment, the specific risk appetite of the organization, and the potential for control override or failure. A key aspect is verifying that the control activities directly address the root causes of the risk and that their performance is monitored. For example, if a control is designed to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data, the auditor would examine access logs, user permissions, and audit trails to confirm that only authorized personnel can access the data, and that any attempts at unauthorized access are logged and investigated. The auditor's objective is to provide assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of the risk management framework, including the controls put in place, aligning with the principles outlined in ISO 31000-2018. This evaluation is not merely about the existence of a control, but its actual contribution to managing risks within the organization's stated tolerance levels. Question 26. An internal auditor is reviewing the risk management framework of a multinational logistics company. The company is experiencing increased competition from new entrants leveraging advanced digital platforms and is also navigating evolving international trade regulations. The auditor needs to assess how effectively the organization has established its risk management context. Which of the following actions by the auditor would best demonstrate an evaluation of the established external context as per ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. Verifying the existence of a documented risk register and its completeness in capturing all identified risks. Option B. Reviewing the minutes of board meetings to determine if discussions about market trends and competitor activities are recorded. Option C. Assessing the internal audit department's independence and its adherence to the audit charter. Option D. Examining the company's documented strategic objectives and assessing how identified risks align with achieving them. The correct answer is D. Examining the company's documented strategic objectives and assessing how identified risks align with achieving them. Explanation: the establishment of the external and internal context is a foundational step in the risk management process as outlined in ISO 31000-2018. This phase involves understanding the environment in which the organization operates, including its objectives, strategies, and the factors that influence its ability to achieve them. The internal context encompasses the organization's culture, governance, policies, processes, and resources, while the external context considers political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental (PESEL) factors, as well as stakeholder expectations and the specific industry landscape. An internal auditor's role in this phase is to assess whether the organization has adequately identified and analyzed these contextual elements to inform the subsequent risk assessment and treatment activities. The effectiveness of the risk management framework is directly tied to the thoroughness of this contextual analysis. For instance, failing to consider emerging regulatory changes, external context, or a shift in employee morale, internal context, could lead to misidentified or inadequately treated risks, undermining the entire process. The auditor must verify that the context is reviewed periodically and updated as circumstances change, ensuring the risk management approach remains relevant and robust. This includes examining the documentation and evidence supporting the identified contextual factors and their integration into the risk appetite and risk criteria. Question 27. During an audit of an organization's risk management process, an internal auditor reviews the risk register for a critical operational risk. The organization has defined likelihood as possible, occurring once every 1-5 years, and consequence as moderate, resulting in a significant disruption to a single department for up to 1 week. The auditor notes that the risk event, involving a failure in a legacy IT system, has historically occurred twice in the past 3 years, with each incident causing a complete shutdown of the primary customer service platform for an average of 3 days. Considering the principles of ISO 31000-2018 for risk analysis, which of the following auditor observations most accurately reflects a potential deficiency in the organization's application of likelihood and consequence assessment for this specific risk? Option A. The auditor concludes that the organization has correctly applied the likelihood and consequence scales, as the event has occurred and caused disruption, fitting the general descriptions provided. Option B. The auditor notes that the consequence description is too detailed, as ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes qualitative assessment without specific timeframes for disruptions. Option C. The auditor observes that the historical frequency of the IT system failure, twice in 3 years, suggests a higher likelihood than the possible category, and the actual impact, full platform shutdown for 3 days, aligns with the moderate consequence definition, indicating a potential underestimation of likelihood. Option D. The auditor identifies that the risk event's impact, a complete platform shutdown, inherently means the likelihood cannot be possible, but must be at least likely according to standard risk matrices. The correct answer is C. The auditor observes that the historical frequency of the IT system failure, twice in 3 years, suggests a higher likelihood than the possible category, and the actual impact, full platform shutdown for 3 days, aligns with the moderate consequence definition, indicating a potential underestimation of likelihood. Explanation. The fundamental principle of risk assessment within ISO 31000-2018 involves understanding both the likelihood of a risk event occurring and the potential consequences if it does. Likelihood refers to the probability or frequency of an event happening, often described qualitatively, e.g., rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain, or quantitatively. Consequence, on the other hand, relates to the impact or outcome of the risk event, which can be categorized across various dimensions such as financial, reputational, operational, or safety, and also described qualitatively, e.g., insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic, or quantitatively. When an internal auditor is evaluating an organization's risk management framework, they need to assess how effectively the organization defines and applies these concepts in practice. This includes examining the criteria used for both likelihood and consequence scales, ensuring they are appropriate for the organization's context and objectives. The auditor would look for evidence that the organization consistently applies these scales during risk identification and analysis. For instance, if a risk is identified as having a likely probability of occurring and a major consequence, the auditor would verify that the organization's established criteria for likely and major are being met by the specific risk being assessed. This involves scrutinizing the risk register, risk assessment reports, and any supporting documentation that details the rationale behind the assigned likelihood and consequence levels. The goal is to confirm that the assessment process is robust, consistent, and provides a sound basis for subsequent risk treatment decisions. The auditor is not determining the risk levels themselves, but rather assessing the adequacy and effectiveness of the organization's methodology for doing so. Question 28. An internal audit of an organization's risk management framework, conducted in accordance with ISO 31000-2018, is examining the effectiveness of its established communication and consultation processes. Considering the principles and guidelines of the standard, what is the primary objective these processes are designed to achieve within the risk management lifecycle? Option A. To ensure that diverse perspectives are considered and that stakeholders are informed and engaged throughout the risk management process. thereby improving the quality and acceptance of decisions. Option B, to formally document all risk-related discussions and decisions to create an auditable trail for regulatory compliance purposes. Option C, to disseminate risk management policies and procedures to all employees, ensuring consistent application across departments. Option D, to identify and report all potential risks to senior management for immediate mitigation planning and resource allocation. The correct answer is A, to ensure that diverse perspectives are considered and that stakeholders are informed and engaged throughout the risk management process, thereby improving the quality and acceptance of decisions. Explanation: the core of effective risk management, as delineated by ISO 31000-2018, hinges on robust communication and consultation processes. These processes are not merely about information dissemination, but about fostering a dynamic exchange of views and knowledge among all relevant stakeholders throughout the entire risk management lifecycle. Clause 5.4 of ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that communication and consultation should occur at all stages, from establishing the context to monitoring and reviewing. The purpose is to ensure that risk management decisions are informed by diverse perspectives, that stakeholders understand the risks and their implications, and that their concerns are addressed. Effective communication involves tailoring the message to the audience, using appropriate channels, and ensuring feedback mechanisms are in place. Consultation goes further by actively seeking input and advice from individuals or groups who have the authority to influence the risk management process or who are affected by its outcomes. This collaborative approach enhances the relevance, accuracy, and acceptance of risk management activities. For an internal auditor, assessing these processes requires evaluating their comprehensiveness, inclusivity, clarity, timeliness, and the extent to which they genuinely influence decision-making and risk treatment actions. It's about verifying that the organization isn't just ticking a box, but is actively engaging its people and relevant parties to build a strong risk culture and improve the effectiveness of its risk management framework. The question probes the auditor's understanding of the purpose of these processes in the context of ISO 31000, looking for the most encompassing and accurate description of their role in achieving effective risk management. Question 29. An internal audit of a global manufacturing firm, Innovatech Dynamics, reveals that while a formal risk management policy exists and is documented, the operational teams frequently bypass established risk assessment procedures when making rapid production adjustments. Senior management has expressed general support for risk management, but has not actively participated in risk review meetings or visibly championed the integration of risk considerations into performance metrics. According to the principles of ISO 31000-2018, what is the most critical deficiency contributing to this disconnect between policy and practice? Option A. The internal audit team has not adequately communicated the findings of previous risk assessments to the operational teams. Option B. Insufficient visible commitment and active engagement from senior leadership in embedding risk management into daily operations and decision-making. Option C. The risk assessment procedures themselves are too complex and require simplification for operational staff. Option D. A lack of external regulatory mandates specifically requiring the integration of risk management into production adjustments. Correct answer is B. Insufficient visible commitment and active engagement from senior leadership in embedding risk management into daily operations and decision-making. Explanation: the effectiveness of a risk management framework, as outlined in ISO 31000-2018, is fundamentally influenced by the visible and active commitment of leadership. This commitment is not merely about endorsing a policy, but about actively integrating risk management principles into the organization's culture, decision-making processes, and strategic objectives. Leadership's role is to champion the framework, ensuring it is understood, implemented, and sustained throughout all levels of the organization. This includes allocating necessary resources, setting the tone at the top regarding risk appetite and tolerance, and holding individuals accountable for risk management responsibilities. Without this demonstrable leadership involvement, the framework can become a superficial exercise, failing to achieve its intended purpose of improving organizational resilience and performance. The standard emphasizes that leadership should establish and maintain the risk management framework, which encompasses defining roles and responsibilities, ensuring the framework's integration with other organizational processes, and fostering a culture where risk is considered in all activities. This proactive and pervasive engagement is the cornerstone of a robust risk management system. Question 30. An internal audit team is reviewing the risk treatment prioritization process at a multinational logistics company, Global Freight Forwarders. The company has identified several potential risks, including a cyber attack on its tracking system, a significant disruption to a key shipping lane due to geopolitical instability, and a sudden increase in fuel costs. The audit team notes that the company's risk criteria include impact severity, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic, and likelihood rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. The risk management framework also mandates consideration of the speed of onset. When prioritizing these risks for treatment, which of the following approaches most accurately reflects the principles of ISO 31000-2018 for effective risk treatment prioritization? Option A. Prioritize risks that are most easily mitigated with readily available resources, even if they are not the highest ranked according to the risk criteria. Option B. Prioritize risks solely based on the highest potential impact, regardless of the likelihood or speed of onset, as catastrophic events require immediate attention. Option C. Prioritize risks based on a combination of their assessed impact severity, likelihood, and speed of onset, ensuring that those exceeding the organization's defined risk appetite and tolerance levels are addressed first. Option D. Prioritize risks based on the subjective opinion of the senior management team, as they have the ultimate responsibility for strategic decision-making. The correct answer is C. Prioritize risks based on a combination of their assessed impact severity, likelihood, and speed of onset, ensuring that those exceeding the organization's defined risk appetite and tolerance levels are addressed first. Explanation. The core principle of prioritizing risks for treatment, as guided by ISO 31000-2018, involves a systematic evaluation of identified risks against the organization's risk criteria. This evaluation typically considers factors such as the likelihood of the risk occurring, the potential impact or consequence if it does occur, and the velocity or speed at which the risk might manifest. Additionally, the organization's risk appetite and tolerance levels are crucial benchmarks. Risks that exceed the defined tolerance levels or have the potential for severe consequences, even if less likely, are generally prioritized for treatment. The concept of risk treatment itself is about selecting and implementing measures to modify risk, which can include avoiding, reducing, sharing, or accepting the risk. An internal auditor's role is to assess whether the organization's risk prioritization process is effective, consistent with its established criteria, and adequately documented, ensuring that resources are allocated to manage the most significant threats and opportunities. The process is not arbitrary. It is driven by objective analysis and alignment with strategic objectives.